Hello and welcome to Meet a Columban. I'm Fr Jim Mulroney and I'm your host, and my guest today is Fr Gary Walker. Now, Gary is a boy from Queensland. He was ordained in 1972, and during his lifetime as a priest, he's done various things, but one of the things he has done that very few other Columbans have done is work in a mission that the Society was responsible for in the West Indies, in Jamaica. So welcome, Gary. Now, Jamaica is a place I think that, we in Australia probably don't know a lot about, apart from playing cricket, which is quite high profile, and the fact that there are some pretty good resort motels and not a bad place for a holiday. I don't think we have too much other knowledge about it. So could you just begin by telling us about the experience that you had in Jamaica, the type of circumstance you worked in, and the situation that you found people living in there?
Yes, all right. Thanks, Jim. I was coming to the end of one job in Sydney, in Newtown, where I was involved in formation of students. And I got a phone call from the regional director asking me if I would be interested in going to Jamaica. And as soon as he said it, I knew the answer inside me was yes. But I said to him, yes, I'll need to take a little time to think about this. But yes, the answer was yes. And the background to that seemed to be that older Columbans are leaving missions, the Philippines and Korea, but they didn't want to go home just yet. And Jamaica and Belize were two places that the Society looked at where people spoke English, and they thought we could contribute something in those two places, especially Jamaica, and then guys could retire from Jamaica. And that's how I actually got to go there. As it turned out, after 10 years or so, it was very clear that Jamaica was not a mission for old men, it was a mission for young men. And
how old were you at that time? Which category did you belong to?
45, I think, Jim.
So yeah. You're kind of in the middle. You're not young and you're not old.
That's right, yes. Young enough, but wise enough,
Yes, yeah, that's a good way to start off.
So coming from Queensland, I thought, well, this is wonderful. It'll be like being down on the Gold Coast, nice beaches. And they do have nice beaches in one of the parishes that I was involved in, called Negril, where they had, down at this western end of the island, where they had tourist hotels, and it was quite a burgeoning tourist area. So I got to Jamaica and I almost immediately went to a parish called Lucy in the Diocese of Montego Bay. There were two dioceses in Jamaica, Kingston and Montego Bay, and ours was a country diocese, Montego Bay, and we were helping the bishop there. There's only about 3% Catholics in Montego Bay Diocese, and they needed a few priests. There was a few local priests, but we were there to build up the church as much as we could. So I ended up at this parish called Lucy. And I was there for a couple of years, and it was my exposure to Jamaica. I thought that it might be, a nice kind of tourist area. And while that was true, Jamaica is actually quite a violent society. All of us found that to be wearing. And in a way, we learned a great deal from the people. For example, when I was at Lucy, I had another church called Cave Valley, which was in the country, and you drive down there. And once I drove down there and all of the people were gathered at the bottom of a hill. And I thought, this has got to be trouble. And when I got there and I went down to them, they told me that one of the stalwarts of the parish, Mrs. Cameron, had just been on her knees in her backyard, pleading with a man with a gun not to kill her grandson. And the story was that her grandson and some other youths tried to hold this man up, who was a shopkeeper, but he fought them off, and he knew who they were, and he came looking for them to kill them. The police have a place, but this is kind of just law of, not law of the jungle, but law of people looking after themselves, because in a true sense, it was difficult to get true justice. One of the things I realised about Australia is that we might complain about things, but here government does work. The police force is basically lacking in criminality or corruption. That's not totally true, but it was very difficult in Jamaica for police, because they got paid next to nothing, and they're always open to bribery.
Yeah, now we know that, the experience of violence, we had Vinnie Power, who was a Columban in Montego Bay, and he was murdered, I think, in an attempted robbery.
That's right.
And this must have quite a profound effect on people and the way they think and the way they go about trying to live their lives.
Yes. Oh, yeah. One of the other priests too, he was in a parish. There were two of us down the western end of Jamaica, the Montego Bay Diocese, and he drove into his parish house around the back, where there were two men with guns waiting for him, and they took him inside and they told him to lie down on a mattress face down while they systematically robbed the place. And there was nothing really abnormal about that. A fellow had been killed, same thing had happened down the road and had been killed, but our priest, he was spared, and who knows why.
Now, why people get spared and why they don't is often quite a mystery.
Yes.
But violence normally, I think, is bred out of poverty, out of injustice, out of people being exploited by those that have maybe power and maybe wealth. Is this the way things work there? I know that Jamaica is pretty famous for its drug industry, and a lot of people who have money actually are involved in drugs, and that's supposedly an illicit kind of operation. Do these things come into the equation?
Yes, that's a very good summary of what was happening in Jamaica. Their marijuana was very much in demand in the US back in the 50s and 60s. And of course, a lot of guns were brought in from America to protect the plantations. And then when they got to plant this Jamaica Blue, as they called it, up in America, and they didn't really need Jamaica a great deal, the guns remained. And of course, then it was pretty much like an outlaw society. Police did what they could. But there were very powerful people organized in the marijuana business. And Jamaica was actually, so they said, a stopping off point for Columban drugs. They would go to Haiti, then they would come to Jamaica, and then they would move on up to Canada and the States. And of course, they have these navigational beams now that are absolutely spot on. And they could land in a bay in Jamaica and load up there in a fast boat and be gone like in 25 minutes. So there was all that sort of stuff always happening. A German was involved in the drug trade, so they said, and he was the victim of a hit. A couple of guys came down from Canada because the marijuana he sent through was poor quality, and he had to be taught a lesson. And I did a little press service for the not for the family, for the people who worked in his bar, actually in the bar, because this was just where it all happened. And his daughter was with him when he was killed.
Yes.
But anyway, just said a few prayers, and they sort of live. They move on. They live through it.
Now, these sort of situations of people don't fall out of the sky. They have a history to them. Jamaica, I think, was Spanish territory at one time, and then the British kind of bullied their way into it.
Yeah.
Somewhere around about 1700.
Yeah.
They brought large numbers of slaves from Africa to work the sugar plantations, and bananas is another crop I think that West Indies is famous for. And this history has a lasting effect. And although technically there's no slavery in Jamaica today, there is probably an economic slavery which keeps people in a subdued state, maybe through poor working conditions, low wages, lack of continuity in their work, which keeps people poor.
Well, once again, you've summarised it very well, Jim. That's what happens. There's rich and poor. Mind you, a lot of the rich people are very ethical people, because to run a business, you have to trust somebody.
Yes.
And these are local Jamaicans. But on the other hand, there's the rich and the poor, and it goes back to the slave days when the planters who made such great fortunes, some of the big families in Glasgow and Bristol made their money from slavery. And well, gold, sugar was like gold in England, and they just destroyed these people. They broke the society. They would move the men from one place, one property to another, and then take the women and send them somewhere else. And so to this day, there's very little stability.
I think even marriage was banned among slaves at one time, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right, yeah. And even to this day, when I looked up the marriage book in Lucy, this is back in the 90s, and it'd been 19 marriages in 44 years.
Which is not a lot, really. Well, how do you end up, I presume, with a lot of single mothers looking after children?
Yes, women have got to have a child. If they don't, they're really looked down upon. They're called mules, as in, mules and donkeys. And what they would do is try and find a man who would support the child. And some Jamaicans, almost like African tribal leaders, they would support maybe 20 children.
Yes.
And the mothers, and they have the money to do it. And Jamaicans, a bit like the Africans, a bit like the Lebanese too, they wear their gold, they wear their wealth on their chest.
Yeah.
And some of these guys were really very good, but often, it was dreadful. Guys that just do nothing, and the police, they didn't worry about it. So, and basically a fellow who ran a technical school in one of the places where I worked, he said, basically, Jamaicans don't trust one another. And he says, that's what holds us back. And he said, I'm committed to this country, but unfortunately, a lot of the really talented people would go to Canada or to the States because they could get on, and they do very well. They work hard. They're smart people.
Now, I think quite a few people from Jamaica also, they go to the States or other places to work and send back remittances.
Yes.
Now, to the best of my knowledge, no country has ever succeeded financially on the back of remittances from overseas, partly because they are sent back to families who spend them in whatever way they want. Often on white goods or luxury goods that are imported anyway, so the money goes back out of the country again, or medical treatment, and a lot of the money for medicine goes back out of the country again.
Yeah.
So the money comes back. It's not targeted spending. It's not productive. And basically, it recycles the poverty of the family.
That's right.
Because when one migrant worker finishes being a migrant worker, unless someone takes their place, the family is back where they started from, or
That's
maybe
right.
even further back than they started from.
Yeah.
So
Well,
in terms of people making progress in life, how do you see the Jamaican society?
well, I can't see how they're going to get ahead. Like,
Yes.
as you said, the tourist industry, I had a good look at it when I went to work in the grill where the bishop asked me to build a presbytery and establish a parish. And there were many hotels there, and since I left, there's more being built. But mostly, the arrangement is that, like especially for Americans, they pay their money in America, and then they come down to Jamaica. They go into these hotels. They don't leave the hotel. That's where they have their holiday, and the money never hits Jamaica at all.
Yeah. I think it's fairly well known that the countries that make money out of tourism are the ones who send the tourists.
Exactly.
Not the ones who receive it.
That's right.
And in your parish, in your pastoral work, what type of people would come to the church? What type of people would, say, attend Mass on Sunday, for example? And what kind of service was your parish called upon to offer in the general area where you were?
Well, I was in 3 different places. First place in Lucy, it'll be a mixture of people, a couple of fairly wealthy families. Well, they had working businesses and they did fairly well. And they really kept the parish afloat. People really didn't have very much money. The children, for example, we never had any schools. And the children would find it very difficult to get on the bus and go to school because if there wasn't enough room for them, the bus driver would take an adult fare before he'd take a child's fare.
Yeah.
And people were conscious of one another. There were small groups, and just like in a lot of places, they looked out for one another. And that was one of the good benefits. We weren't into giving things away at all. We worked with what we had. And people were very loyal to one another, I think. In all 3 places, I was also up in the mountains at a beautiful place called Seaford Town. I would have liked to have stayed there for a long time. And the very best of your people would go to North America. But in this place, there'd been a German settlement back in the 1840s. And they had come down all the way from Germany to find out that the land they were promised wasn't there. And most of them went to the States, but some of them stayed. And as you said about remunerations, these people would get to Canada and they'd send a lot of money, really, back to Seaford Town. But yeah, nobody was moving forward. And as I said, the best of your parish would suddenly say, Father, we're going to Canada.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you had the other sort of thing with people not having enough money, and the tourists would just come and have a good time. But I remember there was a Frenchman, an economist, and he was talking about how Jamaica was getting on board with its borrowings, that they'd done another very sort of a harsh lockdown on spending. Yeah. And I said to him, go and read the paper, and what you'll see is the poor people will be able to buy less food. What they'll be eating is chicken back, which is the back of the chicken, which is basically bony. And I couldn't believe it when this fellow was amazed. I said, kids won't be able to go to school because their parents won't have the money. And they're paying back their debts all right to the overseas companies, but it's impoverishing these people. And yeah, I still can't believe that this really intelligent on-side man didn't know this stuff. or like scallion and oranges and things like that were grown in Jamaica. They just couldn't compete with Florida. And they just, and it's, well, then they did nothing, because it's not as if they've got the ability or the resources to move into another area. This is what they've always done.
So the sort of romantic image of Jamaica that Harry Belafonte presented, for example,
Yeah.
that doesn't seem to rhyme with the reality.
No, it's a hard place. People would come down to the hotels, and there'd be bands there, and they'd say, "Oh, play Harry Belafonte," you know, "Down the way where the night," and Jamaicans just go.
And the nights were anything but. Huh?
Oh yes, I mean, I went to the cricket once. Australia was playing in Sabina Park, maybe 95, 96, somewhere there. Yep. And I was the only white man in the stand. But the people were in good spirits. And what I found out later on was that if this is Sabina Park, if you cross the road, you're into hostile territory, because across the road was where the Western Ghetto began. Nobody went in there. The police didn't go in there. It was run by drug lords, and the only group that were allowed in there were the Jesuits.
Right.
Because they were doing things for the people. You know.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, now, Gary, you went to the cricket, and I don't think any conversation about the West Indies can be complete without a bit of cricket. I think you had a pretty interesting day one time when the West Indies beat Australia, and beat them rather magnificently by making a huge score on the last day, which somehow or other disrupted Sunday Mass and disrupted everything else. Huh?
That's right, yeah. It was a bit like the lockdowns here. There was nobody on the road. Yeah. I had to go somewhere. There was nobody on the road. I was all on my own. And of course, yes, that was the time they made that score, and they were delighted. They used to, I had to tell them, they'd always think I was American or Canadian. And I'd say, I am not. That meant nothing. Yeah. So then I'd talk about cricket, and they'd say, "Oh, you're Australian." Yeah. Yes.
Makes a difference, huh?
Makes a difference, yeah. But they don't put the money, resources into their cricket. They've got natural ability. But the Caribbean just can't get on together. They want to just get their own people in. Not the best team, just get your own guys in there.
Just the right team.
Just the right team.
Okay, Gary, thank you very much. We might leave it there.
Okay.
And thanks for joining us today and giving us your time and reflections on a topic that really, I think, most of us don't know too much about. Okay, good. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me, as they say. You're most welcome. And we've been talking with Father Gary Walker in Meter Columban, and I'm Jim Mulroney. Goodbye.